Hi, everyone. This week we have something a little bit different. We're here with Jessmyn Solana, who is Interact's oldest employee. We've had some people filter through before her, but she was the first one that stuck. And it's been 3 years now or more.
Yeah. Well, I hit 3 years this year. Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
hi everyone. And I always forget to say hi in the beginning, but 3 years this year, and then in gosh, is it July next year? Will be my fourth year.
July 10th, I think,
Yeah,
if I remember right.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So coming up on 4 years, which is like million years in startup world. Um, but I think the thing that is really fascinating about your story is that when you came on, at least from my perspective, you were switching careers
hmm
from sales to marketing, and you were
hmm
also a year out of college, so you'd
hmm
only like done one job before this. And 23 years old, and you decided to join a startup that was four people at the time
Yeah.
and really tiny. And I guess from my perspective, that's just not something that people do that often, like take that kind of risk. So I thought that'd be a great jumping off point. Just share with us how you got to that point where you're ready to do that kind of risky thing as a 23-year-old.
I think it's funny that you say risky because to me, like the word that always popped into my head was opportunity, which probably sounds corny when I say it, but um it's kind of crazy. It like goes all the way back to, my parents coming. They actually immigrated from the Philippines in like the 80s. And so for me, it was always like I wanted to do something that mattered because I grew up in a setting that was like, you are really privileged and you are really blessed to have grown up in America you know, in a very comfortable lifestyle. And so I always wanted to do something that mattered, but I also wanted to make sure that it was something that would make my parents proud, I guess you could say. And so for me, finding what was a small startup was more of an opportunity because I felt like I could make a bigger impact. And I actually the last company that I was at was a startup, but they were growing, but it was very much structured. So it was like what you would call a 9 to 5. And it was sales development, which I wasn't good at. I'm not going to lie. I was not good at sales and I didn't really like it. And my passion was always marketing. And I thought that, oh, if I just kind of get a shoe in somewhere, I will kind of get that opportunity. But it just didn't work out that way. And so after the fact, I like wasn't working actually for like 5 months. And I was like, I had to move home. I had to move out of San Francisco. It kind of like uprooted my whole life. I went to school in SF, so I was already there for like 4 almost 5 years. And then to go back to a small town living with your parents after you like thought you made it big in the city was kind of groundbreaking and really like wild for me because I was like almost felt like I was failing, I guess, which is I think a lot of people can relate to when they're young. You always feel like, oh, I graduated, I should like automatically get, some crazy job that's going to make me like all this money and all this stuff. But come 5 months, I wasn't working, and my dad was kind of starting to be like, like you want to just try something. And at the time, I was like, well, I have sales development experience. And so even though I want to do marketing, I think that my thought was still, I have to get in somewhere with the experience that I have and then hopefully make a move into marketing. Um, what was crazy was I had interviewed for a sales development role at another company, and the guy who interviewed me just called me out. He was like, I don't think you want to do this at all. I think you're just looking for an easy opportunity to get a job. And I was like, whoa. And my heart dropped. I wanted to like just like leave the room and forget it ever happened. But it actually really opened up my eyes that I was like, I need to do what I want to do, which is marketing. So I need to like really look for that opportunity. And so I had, applied for some jobs, but everything was kind of like you need 3 to 5 years of experience. And then they were going to pay me like $15 an hour. And it was like not, it was like, how am I supposed to live off that at the time? And one of my cousins actually was like, hey, you should check out AngelList. And it's kind of like LinkedIn, but it's for startups. And if you're interested in the startup life, like that might be a good opportunity for you. And so I did. And I didn't think anything of it because I was like, this is just something that I'm trying. And one day I open up my email and it's from you. And I was like, oh, okay, like someone's interested. And I think if I remember correctly, what you said was like, hi, my name is Josh from Interact. And, we're a small startup in Oakland. And I really like your background. I wanted to see if you'd be interested in this partner marketing position. And at the time, I honestly did not know what partner marketing even entailed, but I was like, marketing, this could be something like new for me, but along the lines of what I want to end up doing in life. And I think honestly, my most vivid memory is walking up the stairs in the office the very first time and thinking like, what am I getting myself into? And walking into the conference room and there's like 4 people and I don't know, we all just like really vibed. And I don't know if you remember, I was like, this feels like I'm in Silicon Valley, like this show, and I'm really into it.
That's
But yeah,
basically what it
so
was.
yeah, right? And it was just like this really cool experience. I think that like from there, I remember in my first job, it was like I said, like it was so structured. It kind of felt like a 9 to 5. You had to be in by 8:45. It like gather yourself, start working logged in by 9. And not that that's a bad thing. I think it works really well for a lot of people, but I didn't feel like I was making the impact that I thought that I would make in the world, I guess. I know that's like really aggressive for a 23-year-old, but yeah, and I think after that I was just like, it was hard. It was like you they let you kind of go up quickly in what you're doing in your job. I went from inbound to outbound sales and then I wasn't good at it at all and I was like, this is just not working for me. And after the fact, I realized like it's hard to find a job. I need to move out of San Francisco. And yeah, I really felt like I had failed at the time because, like I mentioned, like my parents immigrated here. I grew up thinking like, this is an opportunity for you. You guys are really privileged. Like we grew up in, like my dad grew up in like the provinces of the Philippines, like on a farm, and my mom was more in the city, but she had your typical like woman experience, like she actually says she wants to be a doctor, or she wanted to be a doctor, but her parents were like, why don't you pick like a profession that will, still give you more time for your family at home? So she ended up becoming a nurse. And at that time, there was like, I guess, like, honestly, I could be totally wrong on how this worked, but America was doing this like program where they were outsourcing people like nurses for like a cheaper price, I believe, or something like that. And a lot of them came from the Philippines. And so my mom started out in Brooklyn as a nurse, and my dad was in San Francisco. And he actually did go to school to be a doctor. So he thought he was going to come here, be a doctor. And at some point they met, and he actually kept taking the test but would miss by a few points. Sorry, Dad, if you don't want me to tell people that. But honestly, like as I look back on, if it were me, I know I'd also feel like really crappy about that. But as I look back on it, my memories of my dad was he was always present and he was always there. And so I think if he did become a doctor, it probably wouldn't have been like that. But yeah, so they were both in the medical field. He still ended up in the medical field, and they both lived in California. And we grew up in a small town. For those who aren't familiar with Tracy, I think it's kind of more up and coming now because it's one of the more affordable places in the Bay Area. That's like you still close to San Francisco. But when I grew up there, it was really small, and pretty much, I don't know, it's like everybody knew everybody. My whole family, not my whole family, but a lot of my like cousins lived there, and everyone kind of passed through there. And so, I didn't really have a lot of like view on what the world was like. What I knew was what my parents had in mind for us. And so I grew up also always thinking that I was also going to be in the medical field. And, my I grew up in a very traditional, like, you should be in the medical field because it's a safe profession. And my dad wanted all of us, me, my brother, and sister, to be doctors too. And that was like really hard, I think, for me, just because it's a lot of pressure, It's like your life's kind of set up for you before you even have any say in it. It's kind of thought out. And I think that that's an experience that a lot of other Asian Americans probably go through as well, especially if you're like first generation or second generation. And yeah, so it was really like that, and I, started out my story kinda starts out in high school, I guess you should say, or you could say, mostly because that's where you kind of figure out what college you're gonna go to, what you're gonna do with your life, and not really knowing that I should end up in business or even in marketing, I kind of was already doing it. I started out in leadership at school, and I ended up really loving it. Like, I loved being behind the scenes, I loved planning things, I loved the strategy behind it, and I loved, like, pretty much just, like, setting stuff up for people and, letting people have, like, an exciting time, like, whether it was a dance or a rally or, picking out what the class sweatshirt's gonna look like. And so by the time I was about to go into my junior year, I was like, I want to do something bigger. And so I had applied to be the student body president and ended up getting it. And I think that was the first time in my life that I was like, holy crap. Like, if you put your mind to something and you really want to do it, you can do it. And it wasn't very often that a junior was student body president, as at our school at least. And then senior year, I was able to do it again, and I was student body president that year. But senior year was really like it it was like pivotal for me just because I guess that year a lot of people didn't want me to be president of the class or like the school, I guess you could say. And I found out about it by somebody who had graduated. They were like, by the way, it wasn't supposed to be you, but the teacher wanted it to be you. So that's the only reason you got it. And little did I know at the time that that would be something that I would experience throughout college, throughout like, in a career of, and just like people kind of being like, it shouldn't have been you. We don't want you here. No one wants to listen to you. But in my heart, I was like, well, I am. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm still going to put 110% into it. And from there, really um, went through that. And then I went through like a crisis figuring out what college I was going to go to, what career I wanted, what major I wanted to be in. And I actually went in I applied to every college undecided, and I ended up choosing San Francisco State. And I went in with an interest in nursing, thinking like I'm going to be in the medical field. That's what I'm meant to be. Um, and I don't know, I just like didn't really know what what I was going to do. I was just like lost. And my dad was even like, I don't think you're going to like being a nurse. Like maybe you should check out something else. But it was hard because it was like, well, I didn't feel like I should be in the medical field, but this was like a means to, this is what my parents wanted. This was like my privilege of being, growing up in America and being able to go to school here and go to college here and learn here and all that stuff. And so my first year, I think it was even my first semester, I was like taking undergrad classes, and one of the requirements was a communications class that everybody has to take, right? And our professor kept putting us into like groups of 4 or 5 people every day, and we'd have like a project. And then somebody had to present. And for some reason, it ended up always being me. And a couple classes later, he's like, "Are you a marketing major?" And I was like, "No." I didn't even really know what marketing was at the time, to be honest. And he was like, "Well, you should be," and then just walked away. And it's crazy how, like, such a little thing made the biggest change in my entire life from there. And it's crazy because I can kind of, like, still see that moment in my head, but for the life of me, I can't remember that professor's name, and I feel so bad about it all the time. But it was just such a big moment, and I ended up switching my major without telling my parents. And I actually did not know what was gonna happen, but I was scared out of my mind. I thought I was going to, like, get an earful. I thought that my dad was gonna be super mad at me, and I went home that weekend and I was like, "I have something to tell you guys," and they thought that I, like, killed someone or something. Not really, but yeah. Um, and I was like, "I decided to switch my major," and he was like, "To what?" And I was like, "To marketing. I wanna be in business." And it felt like an hour, but he paused for maybe like 2 seconds, and he was like, "You know what? I think that that's good for you, and you're gonna be good at it." And I was like, "Whoa," which was also a really big moment for me because I wasn't expecting that from my dad. I was expecting disappointment. Like, my sister, when she went to college, changed her major, I don't know, maybe like 1 or 2 times, maybe 3. I don't even know, that might be wrong, but what I remember, because I was so young when that happened, was my dad was just kinda like, "Why don't you know what you wanna do? Like, just pick something." And, um, every time I'd ask my sister, like, "If you didn't have, like, mom and dad in the back of your head telling you what major, what would you be?" And she'd always say, "I wanted to be a teacher." Like, she loves working with kids, but it just she's the oldest child, so she didn't have, like, the same experiences with me where, like, I saw her struggle. I saw my brother struggle to figure out what career he wanted to do, and at this point, I was just like, "I just have to do it." Like, "I'm sorry, dad." He tends to be nicer to me anyway when I do something wrong because I'm the baby, but I was just like, "I just gotta do it and see where it goes from there." And he ended up being okay with it, and he ended up thinking actually that it was gonna be right for me, and it kind of felt like the stars aligned because I was also in San Francisco, which was perfect to be in a business school with. There's so much opportunity there for that. Um, and it was just like, I don't know, it's just kinda crazy. So, after graduating college, then my dad was like, "Okay, what's your plan?" And I was like, "Well, I wanna stay here." And he was like, "Okay, but I'm not supporting you anymore, so if you wanna stay in San Francisco, just figure it out." And so I was like, "Great." So I started, that's when I first, like, built my LinkedIn, and I started kind of, scoping around, and I found this startup that was hiring for sales development. And now when I think back to my interview for that job, I'm so embarrassed because I literally had no idea what I was saying when I think back to, like, one of the questions was like, "What do you think that you'll be doing in the sales development role?" And I was like, "I think I'll be, like, going around to businesses and, like, knocking on people's doors, asking if they wanna buy." And I'm shocked that they still hired me from that because it was all, like, inbound marketing. Like, people are interested, they fill out a form, then it goes into, like, a CRM, and then you reach out to people. Um, and then from there, I was just kind of like going through each day, like really enjoying living in the city and thinking like, oh, like this is it. Like now my career is starting. And it just like ended up not being that great because I ended up not liking it. And I felt like I wasn't being not being, I wasn't like using my skills, and I wasn't using like what I was good at to my ability. It was like a mundane, like everyday kind of job. And there's nothing wrong with that, but for me, I was just like, I can't keep doing this. Um, and then finally, yeah, so I left, and then I didn't have a job for 5 months, had to move back home, back to that part of the story, and when I did, well, I guess you found me, but when I found you, and I went to that interview, I remember just, like, feeling really at home, I guess you could say, like, it felt right, like, it felt comfortable, and I remember when, gosh, what was it? You guys, one of the biggest questions was like, why do you want to work here? Like, why this? And one of the biggest things was for me, like, one, I already had experience in lead generation. So I knew exactly what we were trying to do, or well, I say we now, but what Interact was trying to do. And another thing was in college at the time, like one of the biggest things was data. Like it was like marketing is everything if you have the data. And so when I saw the product, I was like, oh my gosh, like this, it like clicked. Like this is exactly what we keep talking about. And this is exactly like what people need and what they're looking for. And for me, a huge thing was always finding a career or a company that I could click with, that I could speak to, um, and really connect with, and I felt like I had that, and so that was really awesome for me, and I mean, that was just kind of like why I decided to, like you said, like, why do something so risky, was it was just that it was like at the time, I didn't think it was risky. If anything, I was like, this is an opportunity because it's something that I can actually connect with, I can actually understand, and when I talk about it, people will also become to understand because I know it so well. And yeah, so I don't know, I wouldn't say it was risky. I think if anything, it was just like falling into place, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I can resonate with that feeling. It's like when something you just know it's right, even if it's like from the outside it would look risky. Um, but yeah, thanks for sharing. I mean, I hate when people say thanks for sharing. I think you did a really good job of like giving the whole arc of it, which
Mhm.
is exactly what we're trying to do here is just kind of pull out more stories and see how we're all more alike than we are different.
Yeah.
Um, so that was awesome. I think the thing that really jumped out at me that makes a ton of sense in the context of even, from my viewpoint, like your time here,
Mhm.
is this part about not not giving up, not being discouraged by
Mhm.
people not thinking you're the right person for the job.
Yeah.
Not that we've like intended to make you feel that way. Um, but you know, you've morphed a lot in your role here. Like a lot of
Mhm.
things have changed in the last 3.5 years, and you've always been very adaptive to that. And now it makes sense that you mentioned that's part of your story. But I'm really curious, like when that started happening, or when you started noticing that happening, and why you didn't just give up and be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not right for this.
I mean, one thing is I like to literally try everything that I can until I find something that clicks. So I love problem solving. I love like puzzles. I may not be like, a genius at it, but I feel like I'm pretty good. And so I guess you could say like one thing is like I hate letting go. I hate like realizing something just doesn't work. I feel like that's something that I had to actually learn while I worked here with all of the like evolving changes and adapting to it. Like at some point you have to learn to just be like, all right, that's not it. But part of it is that though. I think that's why like I kept pushing through it with anything because it's like, I feel like there is a solution to this. I just need to find the right one. Like I need to find the right combo. I need to find like the right either whether it's like the right tools or I need to, do something within myself internally, whether that's, is it stress, like handling my stress, like I need to clear my mind, or is it something like time management, or is it something like, waking up earlier, like I don't know, like so different things like that. Like for me it's always like it could probably work, So try as much as you can until you're really like, okay, like I think it's time to try to pivot and do something new and figure out what that is.
Mm. What about the voices, other people that are like chiming in because people love chiming in on things like you're trying a strategy, you're trying something new, even like going back to high school, like now you're the
Mhm.
the president and you're hearing this like, oh, maybe people don't want me here. How do you process through that and not let that impact the way that you show up?
This is gonna sound kind of weird, but I shouldn't have started with that. But I like always had this like kind of thought in my head that I was meant for something bigger than myself. And I feel like from an entrepreneurial aspect, like people who want to be entrepreneurs or like want to start something for themselves, that's a common thing. Like you feel like you were meant for something bigger, or like you want something bigger than what it is yourself. So I think like at some point, as much as stuff like that hurts, or you're like, oh crap, like this really sets me back. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's not like I'd be sad about something for 5 minutes and then I'm like, all right, let's go. It could take weeks, it could take days, it could take months. But I think when you really have ambition for something and you really care for something, you really just need to take a step back and think like, okay, that happened. So even in an example of someone telling me like this wasn't supposed to be you, like it wasn't like that was my first like I think blow, right? That they're like it shouldn't have been you this year. At that time, also I was like what 16, 17. And not that I did it well at the time, but I think like at that point I needed to take a step back or like even in changes throughout like nowadays, like I need to take a step back and think like, okay, well, what do I really want? Like I know that everyone's saying like this and that. Like I got one person over here saying that's not working, another person over there saying maybe it should be this. I like to take a step back and like, what do I really want? Or like, what do I envision it to be? And how can I somehow make the compromise of what other people also want? And I think like in the past 3 years, we did this a lot, especially in the beginning. We'd have like meetings or we'd be like, okay, like we should do this and this isn't working. And, maybe we should try this. But I would always take like what I heard and then really work it through in my head. Like I said, I love like problem solving and puzzles and stuff like that. And, that's why a lot of stuff would come up where we'd have another meeting and I'd be like, I thought about what we talked about last time. And here's a couple things that I came up with. I want to know what you think about it. And then really also actively listening. So if other people are like, I think it should be this. It's like, okay, well, why are they saying that? Like, is that something that actually works or is it something that doesn't work? And if it's negative, do I even need to listen to it? And, hopefully, like, it won't, I guess, like, shut down my ego of like this, like, I meant for something bigger. Um, but yeah, like, trying to find, I guess, the middle ground, like taking what that was and finding the middle ground, but also still pushing through. Like, you gotta remember, like, why you're here. You got to remember like what you want out of life and do you want to just let people push you around and tell you that like you're not good enough or do you want to use that energy and make something out of it?
Hmm. I think the word that is coming to mind a lot is resilience. And that's something that has really stood out here. Like I'm thinking of moments in your time with Interact where, we've had big changes in the company, or people have left the company, or, you know, we've shifted a lot. And you've always come back with like a new set of ideas, a fresh set of ideas. But those are also the types of moments that can be very de-energizing and kind of take the momentum away where it's like, oh, we're shifting again. Um, how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about getting to that point? What's going on behind the scenes that leads you to this point where it's like, okay, we've had another big shift, but I'm coming back with fresh ideas. Like, let's do this.
My first thing that I do is I'm always like, okay, so they want to change or like this is going to change. Let's look at why first. And then I like to kind of figure out like, okay, like what obstacle might come from this that I could run into, since usually if it's a big change for me, it's going to be in my everyday, like daily activities, daily job, and all that stuff. So I'll look at like what obstacles could I potentially run into, so that way if it does happen, I'm less surprised. And then that's where the ideas come from. It's like, okay, so if this obstacle happens, say it's like, oh, somebody emails me and is like, actually, like, I quit being a partner. Like, I just like don't want to do this. If I had to deal with that, what would my step be? Or like, what can I do to prevent that? Or what system can I have in place to where either A, I can just, do I want to decide to just be like, okay, cool, thanks? Or do I want to go to the route of like, figuring out what I can do and accommodate and be like, help them or like keep them on or anything like that. So look at the why, and then I like to figure out what the obstacles are. So I'm not surprised. And then I try to ideate like how do I come up with something or like a process or a system that covers all of that deals with the good, but also handles the bad. Um, and another aspect to it that I think doesn't get talked about enough personally is taking care of yourself, like your actual like mind. And I like to do this a couple times. I don't know, maybe like I actually haven't done it in a while. I'm not even gonna lie, but I like to do it a few times a year at least. The last time I did it, I think was in like June, but I took like a whole day off of work. And I think that matters just because, the weekend, your brain already thinks like, this is like a day that I don't work. Like I like to do it on a day that I should be working, or I would be working, I should say. So that way it's like, okay, now I'm going to just do like a whole reset. And it ties into like stuff at work, but it also ties into my personal feelings and my own emotions, and just letting myself know that like it's okay to be overwhelmed, and it's okay to be like emotional about things as long as you don't let it get in the way. But that's why this day is important, because this is the day to do that. This is the day to work through all of what that looks like. And what I like to do is I like to outline my entire day of like, I'm going to wake up at, say, 8 o'clock, let myself like have that time to sleep. And then I'm going to have a coffee, and then I'm going to read a book while I have that coffee for 30 minutes. I'm just going to get myself together. And then for 2 hours, I'm going to journal. And in that journal, I write out all the stuff that, like, you know, maybe are obstacles or I feel like hasn't been working. And then I try to work through like what was I feeling? And then one thing to try to accomplish from that is overcoming that feeling, but also finding a solution to, if it's like a thing like a process or like a tool or whatever, I don't know. But just like what can I do to like help myself feel easier about this moving forward, and kind of like what do I need to remember next time? Like telling myself like, hey, you felt this way before and it's going to be okay. Like when I get yelled at by somebody in an email, I'm like, all right, like we've worked through this and this is something that we can work through again. And after that journaling, then I like to meditate, which I would usually use like an app because I don't know how to meditate on my own. And if anyone's looking for suggestions, I like to use, this is a non-sponsored recommendation, but I used Headspace for a really long time, which was great. And I recently got into Calm because I got it for free through like insurance, and that's really good too. But yeah, just like meditation and looking at different ways to just like let your mind just relax, you know? Doing that for like at least 30 minutes. And then from there, even doing something like to disrupt the day, take a shower, go for a walk, eat like out, we can't do it right now, but eat outside, or like go to a restaurant or something like that. And then disrupt that time, then come back. And then now you're kind of reset to continue. And I do more journaling of like, okay, whether it's like now like my personal feelings about something or like something that I'm stressed out about, and stuff like that, and just like really working through all of that again, like how to overcome that feeling. And then also, what solution can I do moving forward? And the important thing about all of this for me is writing it down, because I know that it's always there. So if I ever go back to it, or if I'm ever like, gosh, like, what did I do with this last time? Like, I have it written down, and I can be like, oh, like sometimes it feels like I didn't write it. And I'm like, who was that wrote that? And it's kind of like helping yourself out later. But yeah, doing this whole mental reset is super important for me. And like, if it usually happens, I like to do it if like there's like kind of like a period of time that I'm really overwhelmed and stressed. So a lot of times if we are going through some big changes and it's something that I feel like maybe I'm super overwhelmed by, then that's a time that I will do that. I think this year, like, I decided to do that, I think for 2 days, because I think we were going through a lot of changes, plus it was like pandemic stuff. So I was like, I'm really like stressed out, and like working from home was like a huge, actually we were already working from home, but it was a huge change because not only was I working from home, but Harry, my boyfriend, was working from home, and we also just moved in together. So we were like figuring out this like cohabiting life, plus a pandemic, plus big changes at work. So I was just like, all right, everybody got to take a break. Um, and I took 2 days off, and that's what I did for 2 days.
That's that's an awesome method. Um, I like I was gonna say I do this often, but I'm not nearly as structured, um, which is telling of actually how we work together. Um, but yeah, I do that like every few weeks, and especially when things are hard. Um, yeah, like more often. Um, but it's a perfect segue because have to get you to write that whole thing out and put it in Entrepreneur's Corner.
Ooh, I didn't even
Um,
think of that.
yeah, I think that would be a great article. Um, and as we're kind of wrapping up here, I think I didn't tell you we're going to do this, but um, just like letting everybody know that you're going to take over as the host of this podcast as well.
Yeah.
And also putting together our new initiative, Entrepreneurs Corner. If do you want to talk a little bit about what that's going to be?
Yes. So for Entrepreneur's Corner, I mean, I'm gonna getting really excited because, as you can just tell from my whole spiel about taking 2 days off of work just to do self-care, I this is something that I really, really care about, and I never thought I would be able to even bring it out into my work life. But Entrepreneur's Corner is gonna be everything about people's stories and, taking care of yourself and how to overcome, all those struggling obstacles that do come about when you're trying to maybe start a business or start a career, or just figuring out like what the hell you want to do with your life. But it's going to be all stories about that, and they'll be on our blog. Am I missing something?
Mm, not really. Yeah, I mean it's just
And it'll
about like
Yeah, and it'll
the
be it'll be written by
realities.
people. Yeah, like it'll be written
Yeah,
by people who
yeah.
are actually going through it or have gone through it. And I think, like, I mean, we were just talking about this yesterday, that what's cool about this topic that I think I'm really excited about is just that, like, we always talk about the successes, and we always talk about like, this is, what happened when my business took off, or like, this is what happened when I all of a sudden realized this is what I'm doing with my life and it's perfect and everything's great. We don't talk about the part where you felt like you were failing. Like, I love talking about the part where I felt like I was failing, just because I feel like it's so much a part of who you are and your story. And I think when people are just starting out that way, like, if I had somebody at the time, or I had a place where I could go to and see, like, oh, like someone who's in my spot or was in my spot was going through literally the same exact thing, I think I would have felt like so much better about myself. I would have felt, like I could give myself a break pretty much. And just kind of taking that step back and thinking like, okay, like it can work out and I can do this. So for me at least, like I hope what people get out of Entrepreneur's Corner is a friend, I guess you could say. Like I hope you feel like you belong somewhere and you get a sense of that belonging. And I hope that also like me being a part of that will help me learn a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm excited about it too because, you know, I like tell this story all the time. Matt, the co-founder of Interact, and Ethan and I, who Ethan's the third co-founder, we parted ways early on, but the three of us decided to start a company because we were sitting in a pizza shop and we were like, should we do this? And then we're like, yeah. And that
I'm
was the
not
whole
surprised
thing.
it was pizza, to be honest.
Yeah, this is very true. But that was literally how we decided. And then, we didn't have any of this community, and it was always just like heads down. And it's really only in retrospect. And my girlfriend is actually interested in starting something, um,
Nice.
Nicole. And as she's talking about all the things that are coming up, and she's like literally the most astute person I've ever met in terms of talking about like how she's feeling. I'm like, oh, I dealt with all this too. I just never thought about it. I just suppressed it all.
Yeah,
Um, and
which is so
so
much easier in my opinion,
sort
but it's
of, but
not good for you.
then you live with it. Like literally, I see a chiropractor now, and he's like, you have a lot of stress in your body. Um, and you carry it somewhere if you don't let
Yeah.
it out. And so yeah, I think it's just going to be amazing to talk about all these things that you
Mhm.
do feel and you do struggle with, as you're starting something. And I think it'd be great to have you kind of at the helm of that, um, from your perspective, because just being able to ask the questions and talk about your experience,
Mhm.
and bring in other people that maybe have similar but different, or totally different, but like it all kind of is the same. So it's gonna be great.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I think people are gonna love it too. I think they're gonna be like, "Oh, wow," like, I just didn't know, like, you see all these big names, but, you know, who were they in their humble beginnings, Like, what happened when that moment that they were just like, "All right, this is where it's gonna change, and this is what I'm gonna do, and this is how I'm gonna do it."
Right. And even like, who are they now? Because it's like people love being, I don't know, it's so frustrating how like there's so much stuff out there that's just like, oh, this is what I do now and everything's great. And it's like,
Mhm.
even from my perspective, it's like Interact is a fairly large-ish company, but
Large.
everything is not great,
Yeah.
internally and externally. Like it's just not, and I don't think it ever is. I think it's always a struggle, on some level, and things get better, but like I think there's always things that are there. So I think that's exciting too, to be able to
Mhm.
share lots of different perspectives, like somebody who's just getting started or hasn't even started yet and is thinking
Yeah.
about it. Someone else who's making like $1 million a year, and
Yeah.
what's going on in their mind. So I think it's going to be awesome and very exciting.
Yeah, I love it. It's gonna be
Awesome. Well, we can wrap up there, but thank you for sharing your story, and people will get to hear a lot more from
great.
you
I
as the
know.
host going forward.
I wanna say thanks for having me, although I'm gonna be, like, now hosting, but yeah.
Here you go. You can have it.
I'll now take the torch.
Yes.
Um, I'm excited. Well, thanks, guys, and thanks for listening, for everybody who will listen.
Yeah. Thank you.